Battlefield 5 is no more. The once mighty franchise has been essentially brought to its knees, it seems, through a number of misdirected gaffes and poor support. Just as it was hitting its stride in pretty decent content releases, DICE have announced that support for the title will cease as of June 2020. The 6th chapter to the much anticipated and highly hyped Tides of War content system will be the last. No more Tides of War, no more fronts, and no more live support. The title that looked to be leading the charge into what could have been a new era for the series, and if done correctly, the AAA first-person shooter genre as a whole, has been prematurely canned. But what happened? Why did this title, that had so much potential for innovation and fantastic gameplay, get such an unceremonious end? Well, these are my thoughts. Please note that I don't actually own Battlefield 5. I mean, even as a long-time fan of the series, I could never justify purchasing the game until it had more content, which it now seems it will never get. So this is all from an outside perspective. I mean, the perspective of a player and fan who's observed it rather than played it. And I kept up to date for the most part with what was happening in the game, what kind of content was coming out, new maps and weapons. But, well, other than the fact that my PC at the time of release was just not powerful enough to actually play it, it didn't really strike me as a particularly worthwhile package. And I came close after the Pacific update, which looked to be seriously impressive, but ultimately didn't due to financial reasons, and geez, am I glad I held off. Let's take a look at the catastrophe that was Battlefield 5. By the way, as the title implies, these are just my thoughts. This isn't a particularly heavily researched video, at least not like the others on my channel. It's more of a kind of brief thoughts and opinions on the topic. And all background gameplay will be from Battlefield 1942, as it's the closest game I own to Battlefield 5, so don't at me. Battlefield 5. What's there left to say after all the bigger channels have covered this topic in much greater detail and over a longer period of time? Well, not a lot really. I do recommend you go and watch Westy's video on the topic before this one. He goes into the cancellation of the service in quite a bit more detail than I will, and as a dedicated Battlefield YouTuber has a lot of coverage on the entirety of the game on his channel. The link is below. It's a good video and a great channel, so it's well worth a watch. Battlefield 5 was teased to be a whole new experience, expanding and building upon the gameplay and style that debuted with the awfully titled Battlefield 1. And Battlefield 1 exists, to me at least, as somewhat of a soft reboot to the series. It changed and streamlined quite a lot from the previous titles, especially the likes of Battlefield 2, 3 and 4. I mean, obviously the setting was one of them. No longer modern or modern themed, the game was sent all the way back to the First World War. A conflict that very, very few games ever touch upon, and that the Battlefield series has only ever seen in mod form. The hype for this game was strong. Very strong, in fact. I remember when the debut trailer came out, I was fucking pumped that DICE were able to make it an FPS in the First World War. I imagined all the destruction that would be possible, the interesting blasted battlefield and old school vehicles. I mean, I wholly expected the game to be a much slower pace, and take a realistic route with its combat and weapon systems. Being more focused on simple semi-automatic or bolt-action rifles, with only the occasional SMG or machine gun. And when the beta released, those expectations were tapered somewhat. With the rampant use of automatic weapons and whatnot. But I did overlook it at the time because the Sinai Desert map and the setting as a whole was so cool and felt so fresh that I just didn't care. When the game actually came out though, well, people seemed to love it. The general consensus was actually pretty positive. And yeah, there were gripes with the lack of content and the slow, well actually it's fucking snail-paced release schedule for patches and content updates. But all in all, people generally liked the game. I didn't personally. I found it to be too diluted an experience compared to the likes of Battlefield 4, which always had something to be working towards. I have hundreds of hours in that game, and I've not even locked half of all the medals and challenges that are available. Never mind the leveling up of individual guns. Battlefield 1 just feels kind of meh in comparison. They never felt that there was any much more incentive to be grinding a class as there were to just be not grinding a class, if you know what I mean. In Battlefield 4, there were so many weapons for each individual class as well as generic weapons to unlock that it felt like there were constant rewards for going after objectives and going after kills. And yes, the First World War does limit the game somewhat in how many weapons it can put in the game, but that doesn't excuse the pathetic number that there were, at least when it launched. It felt to me like Star Wars Battlefront 2015 with an ammo counter. But that's not an original thought, by the way. I remember I read that somewhere when it came out, but it's really accurate. I didn't so much mind the inclusion of many automatic weapons, as DICE did justify it by saying it was alternate history. But personally, I just wanted a slower paced game. Maybe I'm just really fucking boring. The fact that it was alternate history, though, is very important, because their next title would do the same thing. When Battlefield 5 was announced, you can bet your ass I was pumped. I know that kind of goes against what I just said, but hear me out. Battlefield 1942 is one of my favourite games of all time. I mean, god damn, it's just timeless. Yeah, it's dated, but the essence of the series can be seen there, bright as day. And I had dreams of Battlefield 5 basically just being a remaster of 1942, which, covered quite a few fronts. With brand new graphics and gameplay for the likes of Wake Island, Omaha Beach, and basically every map that game had, it was going to be glorious. Obviously, this was a fever dream. They would never do that after Battlefield 1, but I was excited nonetheless to just have a new World War II shooter to play. And then came that trailer. You know the one I'm talking about. The one the collective fanbase lost their shit over for having a woman in it. I mean, the fucking cheek. SJW's ruining gaming once again. Well, jokes aside, I do think the backlash to that trailer was pretty ridiculous. But I don't think it was a good trailer. I actually think it's an awful trailer. But not because it had a woman in it or some unrealistic cosmetics or anything. I think it's awful because it's silly. I mean, Battlefield has never been realistic by any stretch, but always had a sense of realism. That trailer just feels haphazard. It's all over the place, and for a series with as much clout as this, it feels kind of amateur. If this was a sequel to Battlefield Heroes or a new spin-off or something, maybe like a Bad Company, I'd have been all over it because those are silly and action movie-esque. But a mainline Battlefield? Well, it may be indicative of the gameplay, yeah, but that's not what Battlefield trailers ever do. They quite often make it out to be gritty, like Saving Private Ryan or something, but this one was like Inglourious Bastards. The inclusion of women or prosthetic arms? I don't give a shit. Not the slightest, actually. If multiplayer games want to be inclusive, then they can be. They said it was alternate history, and so this is alternate history. Women were an incredibly important part of the war effort, but you can't really show that in a video game, can you? Go and plough that field, or pack those munitions. It's not really engaging stuff. So games have the blessing of the medium to be able to change history and do things differently. What if women fought in the Second World War? What would that have been like? Things like that. I felt the whole vibe of the response to that trailer was just stupid, childish, and more importantly, kind of sexist. I mean, even if most of the complaints were reasoned with, well, it's just not historically accurate. Well, yeah, neither was dolphin diving around the battlefields of France of the First World War with an SMG, but that was okay. That got a pass because it was just men shooting guns at other men. It was still not historically accurate. If the response had been mostly down to the fact that it was a god-awful trailer and didn't look like a Battlefield game because it looked silly, that would have been fair enough, but it wasn't it. It was mostly because of the inclusion of women and of a prosthetic arm. I mean, capital G gamers at it again, judging the entirety of a product before it's even been released because it doesn't confirm their bias or conforms to the so-called SJW agenda, which doesn't exist, by the way. It never has. Anyway, that's not what this video is about necessarily, but the trailer played an extremely important role in the perception of every other piece of media released for the game afterwards. It befell the same fate as Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, a game whose fate was decided upon based on a 2-minute trailer. And it wasn't even a bad game when it came out, at least the campaign. It was actually pretty good. And the fact that the internet can make or break a product based off one single trailer is nuts, and a company such as EA or DICE should know this. They saw it happen to COD and how it helped Battlefield 1, so I don't know why they chose this trailer. They just really shot themselves in the foot. So eventually the beta came and went. It was okay, I guess, but I think people were a bit worried about the game now. And, I mean, just the general player base. It felt kinda janky and nowhere near finished. And this was only a couple of months off release too. Was the final product going to be like this? Well, I'm so glad you asked, because yes, it was going to be like this actually. Battlefield 5 released with the bare minimum of content it would need in order to sell for 50 quid. I'm talking bare minimum here. Hell, half the features weren't even finished when it came out. You literally couldn't customize vehicles, and it took over a year for that to be implemented. I mean, it looked incredible. I still don't know how the Frostbite engine runs on any computer. It's simply breathtakingly beautiful all the time. Yep, visuals aren't everything. And anyone who's played a recent EA game knows that. The game touted a new content release system known as Tides of War, and this would take place all over the entire lifespan of the game and span the whole war on multiple fronts. But at the end of the day, the only major expansion it brought was the Pacific, which yes was really good by all accounts, but that's about it. The War Stories campaign mode that was pretty popular in the first game was almost left in a ditch with 5, and the number of missing features and promised features that never made it into the game, even to this day, is pretty staggering. I'd love to go into all of those with much more detail, but as I've said, I never actually owned the game. I only played the beta, and that was an arduous task on my horribly outdated hardware. What I want to focus on is the catastrophe that Battlefield 5 has caused for itself and the series. The Battlefield series as a whole is largely a respected one. It carries a long lineage and has a significant amount of pedigree. It's had its missteps, sure, but has always been able to recover. And Battlefield 5, whilst flawed on release, could have been saved. I mean, they did it once, with Battlefield 4, and even with Star Wars Battlefront 2 to some extent. Those games were revived from the brink of failure and ended up being some of the finest multiplayer shooters in their respective niches. Battlefield 4 more so than Star Wars. In fact, Battlefield 4 is a once-in-a-generation save. They transformed that game from the dire state it was on release, and through careful community interaction, generous updates and patches, as well as continuous support, made it a game that was worth every penny that you paid for it. It had at least 3 free maps and dozens of new features added in by DICE LA over the years. Added to that, the premium membership was also reduced to change or made free altogether multiple times over those years as well. But why didn't that happen with 5? Well, I don't know really. I don't think anyone outside of DICE or EA knows for certain either. It was obviously a rushed project. It released in a state that was pretty much early access. I mean, to be honest, it was actually below that, but I feel that maybe it was a project that had been given up on after poor sales and poor reception. The teams and individuals that had worked on 5 were pulled to make sure that Battlefield 2021 wouldn't be the failure that 5 had been. And that's understandable, I guess. But cutting off support entirely over a year before the next game is even due to be announced? Well, that's some serious shit. Like, that's never happened before for Battlefield. And it does beg the question as to why. You know, like, there are seriously talented people working at DICE who are more than capable of making a project great through new updates, game modes and whatnot, but it's almost that with 5, they never even intended on putting new features into the game at all, or following up on promises and content pledges. Or they did intend on doing that, until the poor reception, and then they pulled out. The Tides of War system did look, especially after the lack of content on release, that they were just going to release all of the content they wanted to put into the main game, but couldn't due to time or because it was cut, as a seasonal thing, and try and lie through a fake smile that it was somehow this extra content. Wow! And Modern Warfare 2019 proves that it's possible to have a system like this in a AAA game. The seasonal content for that game feels like you're actually getting real substantial updates, because the game shipped with so much content in the first place. And people unreasonably complain about Modern Warfare 2019 and how it's predatory and has too many microtransactions, but, you know, it's really not that bad. Be thankful that all of the paid items are cosmetic and don't actually impact gameplay, and that there are no loot boxes of any kind. If you want an item, you can probably buy it, and if you can purchase it as part of a pack outright. And the direction that game took with content is what Battlefield 5 wanted to do, but didn't, or even worse, it couldn't. And Battlefield 5's Easter eggs were seemingly removed from the game as well, which is really weird. And it's another piece of evidence that mounts towards the idea that whatever Battlefield 2021 is, whether it's Battlefield 6 or Bad Company 3 or whatever, EA are desperate to try and make sure it succeeds. The slapped-together Battle Royale Firezone had support dropped, and that was released like ages after the game was, seriously fucking months afterwards. It was touted as a new Battle Royale experience and was initially thought to be releasing with the game. However, before release, DICE did confirm it would be coming soon, as an update. And the lack of significant content and support from the devs just made the whole experience feel seriously half-assed by all accounts, and at least from my perspective it looked half-assed. What the hell were they thinking? The double whammy of 1 being disappointing and 5 being an utter failure makes me worried about the future of the series. I love Battlefield games, but I tend to find the enjoyment I had with the series is now limited to all games pre-number 1 and in Call of Duty Modern Warfare's Ground War mode. It's a real shame that this happened too, because there was such a fantastic opportunity for EA to have a pretty unique and innovative title on their hands. They could have had a rolling platform of content with an engine that wouldn't be out of date graphically for quite some time. The lifespan of such a product would be enormous. You can only look at titles like Battlefield 4 to see how much a consistent stream of content can make a game enjoyable and popular. Battlefield 5 could have included battles from every front. This includes ones remastered from 1942 as well as altogether new experiences. built on a foundation of a gameplay loop and series that are well liked and have a lot of players that are well acquainted with them. They could have made, grand operations, which I have failed to mention up until now, fleshed out with things like Operation Market Garden or Operation Neptune that would see the evolution of famous battles play out in front of you. Maybe throw in some alt history ones like a German invasion of Britain or Japanese landfall on the USA or something. I mean, anything really. They could have done so much with the title. Instead, players and fans got a half-baked shell of not only a game, full stop, but of a Battlefield game. Games that are usually high-quality, fairly polished experiences. It's made quite a large dent in the already slightly bashed bodywork of the Battlefield series, and it's going to take quite some work to buff it out. Will EA even bother continuing? I mean, we all suppose they will. What other franchises have they got left other than Battlefield? It's their flagship series other than FIFA and some other sports titles. Medal of Honor is dead, Mass Effect is dead, and Anthem is probably dead, and you get the idea. It's almost a certainty that this series will continue, and that after the poor reception is what they pulled the Battlefield 5 workforce together to do. As I have said, they'll be banking on Battlefield 6, or whatever it's called, to bring the series back from the brink. And they don't have many licenses left at this point. Many are hoping that they return to the modern era and the design and gameplay of 4. I'm not gonna lie, I hope they do too. That's another great platform they have there. If they could just build off whatever 4 laid the groundworks for, then they could have a seriously popular FPS in their hands. It's what the player base want, EA. Just listen and do it. But, don't be swayed by capital G gamers and their dislike for women in video games, yeah? Thanks for watching. I know this is way more casual than usual, but I just wanted to put my thoughts down on the topic, especially whilst this announcement is fresh in people's minds. I have a huge project coming up soon, a 5-part series of content on Modern Warfare 2 of all games, and it's over 10 years old now, and I hope that the video series that is currently being written will be the most in-depth analysis and retrospective the title's ever seen. I hope so anyway. So thank you again for watching, and please don't forget to like, subscribe and comment your thoughts below. Cheers.